Well, hello, everybody. This is Pastor Jay. I'm so excited that you decided to join us tonight. Welcome to this panel discussion on racism in America and the church. I am so happy and excited to have some of my brothers, some of my friends and colleagues in the gospel, and also some friends that I've had over the years. And you guys have, if you've been following me the past month or so, you know that I've been talking about racism in America, and I've been doing a series, The Color of Love. Really dealing with racism and where we're at today. And I believe that we should always be relevant. We should always be talking about the social issues. Someone asked my wife earlier, it was a conversation that was taking place on Facebook, and they were asking her why the church never deals with social issues. And I was like, wow, even people are recognizing that there's certain things that the church has not been known to deal with. And so we're at a point now in history where we're being called to the carpet, and we have to deal with certain issues or what have you. And so I have some great minds tonight, and we're going to discuss a lot of these things. We're going to discuss a lot of these issues and really talk about our experiences, talk about the things that we've gone through, how do we deal with those things, and how we move forward, and making sure that we get to a place of racial reconciliation, reconciliation in America. We've seen from George Floyd, we've seen from Trayvon Martin, from Breonna Taylor, and all of the others, the things that have taken place. And it's important for me as a pastor, as African American, that I speak out. One of the things that I was making sure that I did this year was through those things, I was going to use my platform, no matter how big or small, to make sure that my voice is being heard. Myself and one of my friends here, we went out, protested, and walked the streets of High Point, North Carolina, and Greensboro, North Carolina, because we want to make a difference. We want to make a change, or help bring change, and make sure that our voices are being heard. And so I'm so grateful tonight to be blessed to have these great men of God. And can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. And so I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. And they're going to take about 2 minutes just to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about them. And we're going to start with, I guess that would be, I ain't going to even try to, because I'm looking at it different. But I'm going to start with Brother Roosevelt Etheridge.
Well, thanks. I am glad to be here, and thanks, Pastor Jermaine, for the opportunity to just share and listen and dialogue with my brothers in the kingdom. I'm Roosevelt Etheridge from Wilson, North Carolina, and I'm a father, and, I'm proud to be an American. Amen.
All right. Pastor McMichael?
Yes, my name is Pastor Lavelle McMichael. I'm originally from Philadelphia, born and raised, spent some time in Arizona, and now I'm in North Carolina pastoring. I'm the senior pastor of the Greater New Hope Baptist Church in the city of High Point. I'm the author of Transforming the Minds of Men, Maximizing Potential from Childhood to Manhood, and I'm a Black male achievement expert. There you go. Thank you, sir. Black male achievement expert, and have really just been a foot soldier on the ground for social justice, fighting for human rights, civil rights, and social justice. So, Pastor Freeman, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight and to share perspective on race in America and the church.
Absolutely. Dr. Webb.
Hey, everybody. So happy and excited to be here tonight. My name is Maurice Webb. I'm the founder and CEO of 21st Century Fatherhood. Also have another small business where we do pavement markings. That's a separate thing. Father of 3 girls, 10-year-old twins and a 2-year-old, and just celebrated 14 years of wonderful marriage to my wife, Laisha Webb. And really my passion has been to make sure that we are educating and equipping men to be better fathers, whether they are custodial or non-custodial parents. And as we're living in the COVID-19 and uprising that we've seen this year, largely in part due to the death of George Floyd, I want to be a part of that conversation as well, been in church all my life, and these topics have never really been discussed. We've talked about them outside the church doors, but I think this is a very, very good conversation to have because a lot of people have this in their heart, and now it's starting to come out. So I think the church should be right at the front door of this conversation. Thank you for having me, Pastor Jay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And my man, David.
Pastor Jay, thank you for having me, man. My name is Dave Evans. I am born and raised in North Carolina, in Durham, North Carolina, to be more exact. And me and Jermaine go back a long time, all the way to, I think, I might have met you in junior high school, playing for Coach White. And I was honored that Pastor Jay asked me to come on and speak from the same point of view, but maybe just a little different look. And I appreciate being here. I got married my high school sweetheart. She's also a Durham native. I got 2 young boys that are coming up, and I want to make sure they come up the right way and not the wrong way. And they and definitely want to leave the world better than I found it. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And so let's open up this way. I want to pose a question to the panel in regards to racism. You know, many people say that there isn't racism going on today. I've viewed several posts that have really said that there is no racism going on, that it's what we see today is not racism, or that it's a fallacy within our thinking, our mindsets. And so, you know, I want to kind of get a take on everyone's perspective on that, but also what's kind of been your experience. You know, we've seen, like Maurice was kind of alluding to, we've seen how we've basically, people have just pulled the wool over their eyes and put blinders on so they couldn't see what was right there in front of them. And I think, you know, from my perspective, that's what it's always been. It's always been a situation where, because of the conversation, right, because of the uncomfortability of the conversation, people just choose to ignore it. And so what are you guys' takes on that? And how do you think we need to move forward from that perspective and understanding, you know, that there is racism and it's something that we need to deal with? Because one thing I do know is we can't deal with anything if it's never recognized, right? You can't deal with a problem if you never admit that there is a problem, you know? And so how do you guys feel we should handle that? Or what's been your experience, even with people that you've interacted with or what have you?
Well, I'll start. You know, I think that for Black folks, we've always talked about racism as victims. And I don't want to speak for every Black person, but largely in part, my experience has been that we've saw racism just from a victim standpoint. I learned about racism from my grandmother, who was spent the latter part of her years in a wheelchair. And she lived through the 60s and the 50s, et cetera. And she was an entrepreneur. And she really began to change the narrative for our family because she saw a way to provide. And economics changed some of the racism because we were able to live in a different neighborhood. But racism was always there because no matter what, how big the house was, she did have a mansion and those types of things. The color of her skin was always the subject of conversation with people around her. And so my conditioning towards racism was always that I was always going to be a victim. And growing up, that's how I saw white people as the enemy. And that conditioning came from what she experienced. And so the first point I would like to throw out there is that when you come to know yourself, you have a responsibility to really learn who you are, both Black, white, and all other ethnicities. And as you enter the workforce, you know, you don't work with people that just look like you. You work with all types of people. So you're sometimes forced into cultural sensitivity. But we know a lot of times the mistakes happen before the you know, there's a lot of mistakes happening before there is a real change. And that's the unfortunate part about it. We don't know something is insensitive until the person is offended by it. You know, So that was my conditioning. So as a black man, I had to go back, and particularly this year, I had to go back and really understand racism for myself, because this was the first time for me personally that if I'm going to have this conversation, I need to be educated about it. Being black in America doesn't automatically educate me, because if my experience is always just victim, then how do I get to solution? Because I want to be about the solutions. I don't want to just be about the problem of it. So that's where I think a lot of us black folks have been in the last 20, 30 years, is that if we just see it as a problem, we never really started to look at the solutions of it. And I think that's what we're moving towards now.
I think that's interesting that you bring that out, that it can go both ways. That even as black people, we may not look at it as a problem. I was having a conversation with one of Roosevelt and I's mutual friends, and I was telling him, I said, well, by definition, he was saying that black people can't be racist. I said, well, by definition, they can. I said, and many times they are, because there are certain sectors of African Americans that feel like they're better than other races, and so we kind of got to understand that and say, okay, we can't just toe the line and say, okay, this only applies to one sector of people, or what have you. So what are some of the thoughts of you, some of the others?
So I'll jump in there because I have to respectfully disagree already, and I was like,
I knew you was coming.
So okay, yeah. So I guess first things first, we have to define what racism is.
I was going to ask
right?
y'all that. Yep.
And racism is prejudice. Yeah, prejudice, discrimination, antagonization of directed against people or a person based on their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, period. So the fact that African Americans are antagonized, discriminated against, and you see that systemically from an institutionalization of racism perspective, then I would agree with whomever you spoke with that African Americans do not have the capacity or the institutional power to be racist. And we are victims of racism, and that's okay to accept that. However, we need to be a part of the systemic shift that brings equality and equity to African American women and other ethnicities who are disenfranchised and marginalized based on the color of their skin. So if you look at economic status, where you live has nothing to do with how you've been discriminated against or antagonized. And so a lot of times we think as we elevate educationally or economically, that will change our experience of racism, only to find that racism is much bigger than how one person treats you in one particular neighborhood. That it is the stigma that comes with being a person of color, period. And it's really important that as African American men, as human beings, that we are, as Brother Maurice said, educated about what that looks like. And I've had the opportunity to work on this for years, since prior to being in college, early college, so like late 1900s to early 2000s, and really look at how racism in America and in this nation has really put us in some compromising positions. And just to bring the church into that conversation, the church is really complicit in its involvement with this, because when white America could stand up against racism, sometimes they fall silent. And that's a big problem when you start talking about white people and so whether or not I get along with a white person is not important, right? Or how a white person feels that racism is wrong. If they're not going to address their fellow white counterparts, then their conversation with me as a black man is null and void, because they are the ones that are behind those closed doors having those conversations. And so
right,
that's when the courageous conversations happen, when you take a stance against the institution itself.
Right. And to you're absolutely right on that. And that's kind of like what I was mentioning when we were offline, even with David, and how which I give kudos to, because it's hard being the Skittle, the red Skittle amongst all the other colors of Skittles in there. So it my wife was like, "Oh, I'm gonna be praying for David." I'm like, "Well, no, trust me, he can hold his own. He can hold his own, and plus he on our side." What have you? With it,
I'll take those prayers any day of the week from Miss T. That's for
Right.
sure. I think so far everything you guys have said has been spot on. I mean, for me personally, and kind of representing that white segment of America, is that you can't fix a problem until you realize there is a problem, right? And what you got to do to fix that is going to be uncomfortable. You're going to lose some people along the way. Since Mr. Floyd and that tragedy went down, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people about the stance I'm taking and why I'm taking it and why now versus why not the whole time. And it's been the whole time, but now you've got opportunities to get out there and do more with it. You've got social media platforms. You can post things right and left. You can talk to people about what's going on and make them relate. I mean, Jay, I remember back in junior high school when it was I don't even know if it's still a holiday. I hope it's not, but it was Confederate Flag Day, and the Klan came out to tuning. Remember that?
Yep.
And the school automatically segregated, like right in the middle. And I was like, oh heck, which way do I go? So I rode with Jay and the guys I play football with, because I knew if they had my back on the field, that they had my back in real life, and that's been the case ever since those days. And as Jay will tell you, we've got a close knit group of friends that went all the way through high school and played ball together, and we cried together and bled together and won together. Only if it was one game our first year, but that one game counted, right, Jay? But
man, still counted.
They still counted. But just waking people up, and it shouldn't have to be that way, right? You should think, or I should think, that people are awake in 2020, and they're still not. I mean, I read people's posts, and I probably shouldn't because it drives me nuts, but people that things that other people post on friends of mine's pages, I'm like, why are you leaving that on your page? You should never advocate for stuff that those people are talking about. And but at the end of the day, only thing I can do is educate the people, and if they want to listen, they do, and if they don't, they don't. But I'm not going to stop, because my goal at the end is to leave the world better than I found it.
Right. All right, Roosevelt.
I appreciate the dialogue of all my brothers, and in my response to racism, I connect with Dr. Cornel West, is that we lack a type of leadership. And the amazing thing about racism, if we continue to talk about the system or systems that were created before all of us were born, that the chances of us overthrowing a system is going to be slim to none. And I'm going to say this because there are many people that talk about the problem, but they're not ready or willing to sacrifice their comfort in order to see real change. So for the conversation of racism is, I think the name of the game is to make sure that we don't become polarized by a system that was already created to dominate and suppress and oppress people. And with that being said, that on one end, and I often say this, and I say this in any community that I am approaching, I often say this: well, if you're moved by a black man dying, then why aren't you moved when money is being polarized by school systems to make one side better than the other? If you're marching because someone has died, then why don't you march because when laws change and it's creating a greater depression for people that are in deprivatized communities. And so in this system of racism, I look at it as an ocean, and inside the ocean, there are many different fish. And you go out there in the ocean and you take your hook, you take your pole, and you fish for what you want to catch. For us, I don't need to be reminded that I'm black. I wake up every morning, I look in the mirror, I see that I'm a black man. However, um, I still live in the same world, and some of my battles with racism now have gone beyond gone beyond the U.S. And I've just had to live with knowing who I am and what type of contribution do I want to make to this earth. And this conversation of racism is challenging. And for me, being a clergy person and having the conversation in the church, I think one of my downfalls and my conclusion to my response, one of my downfalls or disappointments about the church is this: is there are many people that want justice, but they don't want the sacrifice that comes with change to produce justice. We want it to come comfortably. And this sacrifice I'm talking about, it will challenge our income. It will challenge our savings. It will challenge sometimes what we're driving, what we're willing to lose. It'll challenge our careers and may even challenge contracts. I learned early that all money is not good money, but when you don't have any money, sometimes you're pressured. So, and just learning this thing about this big world we're in and racism and the church. I think being a black parishioner, it is challenging because the cultures are different and we don't have enough conversation about cultural intelligence as much as we do about big items like racism. Amen.
Can I mention something?
Yes.
As
Go ahead.
as Brother Roosevelt was speaking, I thought about the story of Cain and Abel,
Mhm.
and just bringing that into 2020 with George Floyd's death and the outcry. Right, it was a time where you could be blind and see that wasn't right, and people started to it was like a rolling drum. It just got louder and louder and louder because more people started to speak up and say, now listen, that's just not right. And all I could see was this man's life, his death, as that blood spilled out. And when God said to him, are you your brother's keeper? That question immediately came up as you were talking to say, am I my brother's keeper? Am I truly my brother's keeper? Because that question for me it challenges me to say, it's not just about somebody who can benefit me. It's not just about somebody who can do something for the greater good of the web home. And I think this is something that is happening for a lot of people because we are starting to see that there's a common outcry. And what I was saying earlier about being the victim, that victim mentality is I haven't known what it means to speak on the solution side because quite honestly, that's not what my upbringing was. So now as I've started to evolve and get to a place where I'm saying to myself, hey, I've got to start being a part of the solution on this thing. I think the church is trying to grapple with that as well. I don't think that this is a willful ignorance. I do think that there is a miseducation, and it's like you said, Roosevelt. There's a comfort in the luxury of staying to myself. I don't want justice if it means I have to sacrifice what we got going on over here. And really, I think what God is doing with us is saying, no, I need you to get uncomfortable. Your brother's blood is crying out on the street. Are you going to do something about it? Are you going to uplift your brother or just walk past him like the people walked past the man who was robbed in the Samaritan town? You know, are you going to be that person that said, hey, pick this brother up, take him over to the hotel and put it on my tab? Because that man has been abused, he's been robbed, and we need him to be taken care of. And whatever it costs, I'll front the bill. And I think that's where I want to be in the conversation. Is I want to be on that side of things and saying, black, white, whatever. I want to be a part of that part of the story.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think, one of the things, as Roosevelt was talking about that, it brought back a conversation I had with my daughters, I guess about 3 weeks ago, where we normally have these round tables, at dinner or right after dinner, what have you. And I said the same thing to them. I said, listen, I'm willing to sacrifice, especially now more than ever, not for me, but for you guys and your children and your children's children, because I may not see the change. I mean, we're talking over 400 years of oppression. We're talking over 400 years of systematic racism systems and things have been put in place to degrade and to disenfranchise a ethnic group. I said, so that may not be fixed in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. Right. However, but you may be able to benefit from that in your lifetime, right? And so I think that's a key for me, is that, to get people on board to understand, listen, the same way that my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother sacrificed for me to be able to have the right to go vote, to be able to go sit at a counter with another white Caucasian or what have you. That's the same thing I'm fighting for right now, is to say, okay, in the future, I know that you'll be able to have things, you'll be able to walk in your neighborhood, right? I was talking yesterday, and I was saying at one point, it was kind of, you could say, okay, it's all intertwined in one neighborhood. They said, quote unquote, if you was in the hood, that was the only time you was going to have to deal with the cops and all that. But now you can be in a multi-million-dollar neighborhood, a gated community, and you can't even walk down the street without being afraid or understanding that your neighbor could call the cops because they woke up on the wrong side of the bed that day. And because they see that you're a black man and they have hate in their heart, now they call the cops. Why? Because they already know that if a cop comes, the interaction may not go well with an African-American. And so I think one of the things is really the educational piece. One of the things I love about Pastor Big Michael is he's educated on a lot of the issues. And, even like when we see today, and this is where I've gotten to, I've always been, and I still believe in this. I still believe in civil disobedience. I still believe in, and, not tearing up things. But, one of the things that me and Pastor McMichael was talking about is like, at some point, you get to a point where you can't take it anymore. You get fed up and you like, look, enough is enough. And a lot of times, I hate to say it, but a lot of times, the only way you get people's attention is when it hits them in the pocket. When they feel like, okay, now economically things are changing. It's like and the unfortunate thing is you have people on both sides that may not understand it. So you may have, millionaires or billionaires that don't understand it as African Americans, but then you have Caucasians and others that don't understand it because they've never experienced it. They've never experienced having to go into a store and having somebody follow you, knowing that you got more money in your pocket than that clerk probably has in her bank account. You know what I'm saying? They've never experienced racism on that level. I was telling them the other day, I said, I guarantee you 98 to 99% of every African-American male, by the time he is 25 to 30, he's already either been profiled, he's either been some type of racism he's experienced in his life. And so even if it's not being brutally beat by the police, even if it's not being profiled by the police, somebody at one time or another, he's experienced racism. And so, one of the things I wanted to ask is, okay, how do, one of the points that Roosevelt made earlier is leadership. Me and Pastor McMichael was talking about this. It's like, we haven't had strong leadership in the African-American community with influence, right? when we had, the Dr. Kings, when you look at the civil rights movement, who have we had really that we can say, okay, he garners the attention of the African-American community and he's able to galvanize us together and move us forward. We haven't had that. And so,
unfortunately, somebody like Louis Farrakhan has been our representation.
Yeah, to a degree. And you know what? As the church, as the church of God, that's an indictment on us.
Absolutely.
It's so many things I want to say. My brain is like,
no, go ahead. That's what this.
First of all, Roosevelt.
That's why I got you on here.
Roosevelt eloquently stated, my brother, bringing Cornel West into this. But a few things really quick. America's original sin is what we're talking about, right?
Right.
And it's really important for us we're seeing this now, but we've been seeing this. And what's the saying that if you don't learn your history, then you're doomed to repeat it. So if we go all the way back, and I mean, 1955. I'm not going to go. We could go further back, but Emmett Till, right?
Right.
We had that 1990. I think March 3rd, 1991. Rodney King. So we have a lot of information that if we know what's happening, then we can take better action around resistance and making sure that we're not repeating these same acts of brutality and dehumanization of Black bodies, period. It is necessary and imperative that we're not just waking up because of something that's happening in 2020, but that we are teaching, training, and rearing children to understand that we have to do more than just than discuss, right? We have to do more than march. We have to do more than get educated and move out of the hood. We have to reach to rescue, teach to transform, and impact lives with purpose. And that is doing the work that is challenging white people to own their part of it. It is asking for them to walk alongside of us and to see us as equal. We are human. Before we are Black, we are men and not less than. This is not the 3/4 compromise. So when you look at authors like Tisby, who wrote the book The Color of Compromise, or if you look at James Baldwin's I'm Not Your Negro, when he analyzes Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, he talks about how these two men were polar opposites, but in their death, their missions were the same. And he talks about being a spokesperson versus bearing witness, where as someone who bears witness, they just kind of they're in and out. They cover the story. They have the panels, right? But somebody that is a spokesperson now speaks for the people. And the reason why Farrakhan and Malcolm X and the church, we reject this kind of stuff, but the reason why they are well received is because they corroborate the humanity of Black America, period. They feel where we are, whereas the church separates itself, it divides, it becomes elitist, it becomes condescending, it creates stigma within itself. And we have to realize that it is time for us to take these type of discussions to the next level and say, this is what I'm doing to mobilize my community. So, this summer I work with the mayor's office. I've done some local things with the community to organize marches, but then behind the scenes I'm working on strategies that help to produce economic empowerment, that provide quality jobs, housing, or whatever to those who are in need of it. But then taking that to the next level, where now I'm empowering them to do what I'm doing. Because what happens is we become so great and we have all of this stuff, but for what purpose? So that we can be fly, wear the latest Jordans, but then claim poverty. Like we have to change a lot of the stigma that's within our own community. But I don't want that to take away from the fact that America is racist.
Right. Because I mean, clearly we still got to deal with that. It's like you can deal with both at the same time. You know, you always have the issue that comes up, and this like boils me to no end when we talk about this. We talk about police brutality, and the first thing they say, most of them say, well, what about black on black crime?
That ain't what we talking about.
That ain't what we talking about. You know, or all lives matter. No, that ain't what we're talking about. You know, that we're talking. That's like saying that that all wives matter, but we're talking about battered women.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense. It's like you know what I'm saying. We're talking about
jump in here. I said I see Roosevelt trying to jump in here.
Come on, Roosevelt. What you got?
When we say all lives matter, what we do is we reject the fact that Black lives matter.
Exactly.
In place of value, we start to. So this is the thing. We should have never had to say Black lives matter.
True.
The fact
Absolutely.
that we have to advocate for these marginalized groups is the problem. So we have to go back to why are we doing BET? Why are we doing the Black Woman Essence Awards or whatever they are? Why are we doing that? It's
right.
Because we were never included in the mainstream society's view of what it meant to be whoever you were.
Right. Right. I mean, and that goes back even to like the Black Negro baseball leagues and things. You know, we were having that conversation the other day when they originally went on the strike with the NBA, and somebody was saying, well, they all the Black players should go and start their own league, you know, and all that type of thing. And you know, and so a lot of times we don't understand the power that we have as African American community. And Roosevelt, go ahead. You can go ahead and jump in before I go to this next point.
I know you're doing good, brothers. I am the president of the MLK Commission here in my city, and for me, there's a lot of issues, and so I'm very good at being able to stay on task with a topic. So if we're gonna, if we're talking about Black men being abused by the police, that is a topic. But if we're talking about America being racist, for me, it's like a no-brainer. America was created and it was originated when there was only one class of people that was considered to be human beings. But for the reality is they all are dead.
Right.
And arguing over that, for me, it doesn't move the ball forward, because Carter G. Woodson said that when a man's thinking is controlled, you don't have to worry about his actions. And he says that if you open the door and that man has been controlled mentally, that you can open the door for him and he'll never walk through an open door.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so in this conversation of racism, I have friends that are white. I have friends of of other ethnicities, and I do also think it is fair to include their voice in some of the liberation that we've had, because had they not been present, will our voice have been heard? And not just presence of whites, but also the presence of youth. We have a lot of youth and young people today that operate under entitlement, and they want the change, but they don't want to endure the process of what it requires to create change.
Right.
And so will we continue to have this issue in America? I believe so. One, because if until the Constitution changes, I think that our problem will still remain.
Yeah.
But how do we move beyond that?
Right. And I think one of the things that we should definitely bring out is it all goes back to education. I know, speaking of Pastor McMichael's book about fatherhood, and a lot of this can stem from fathers not being in the home, from understanding from an African American perspective of understanding who we really are, right, and not having that be reinforced. And I think one of the things, we were having this conversation. It was like, she was talking about the Constitution, and I brought up the same point. You said, well, the Constitution was never written for us. We were never included in that. When those forefathers, when they wrote those bylaws and stuff, we were never included in that. right? And so understanding, like you said, there's some things that's got to be broken up in order for things to change. And I believe that it definitely starts with us. You know, one of the questions that I had is, okay, one of the things that I guess piggybacking off what Roosevelt was saying is the education component. You know, I don't know if you guys saw in the news how Trump is saying that any school or any school system that puts I think it was the African American history or what have you back into the schools, that he was going to defund them or what have you. And I think we've got to get to a point where we understand that American history is Black history, right? Like you said, if you don't know the history of America, how can you ever move forward in understanding how to correct those things? Right. And Pastor McMichael said something that was powerful. I mean, we've seen these things over and over and over and over again. It's like I was telling them, I said, y'all, the BLM movement is nothing there. The organization is new, but the movement is not new. I mean, you can go all the way back to, I think it's 1965 with the James Baldwin Black Lives Matter speech during his debates and stuff. You know, that's when it really, it really came out, the slogan and stuff. But people don't understand that because they're not educated. And so they feel like, and that's another thing. That's a whole nother topic. Like Rose was saying, stand on topic. That's a whole nother topic about them.
Roosevelt.
You're right.
Stay on topic. Stay on topic.
But because some of those things really, I mean, and they play into racism, but you can't mischaracterize a movement because of an organization. You know what I'm saying? Or because of those that are associated. When we look at a lot of the protests that are going on today, when you look at the footage of those, you see that a lot of them, they don't look like us. The ones that are causing, raising hell, they don't look like us. You know what I'm saying? But yet they are actually bringing the negative standpoint on purpose to the movement. And people, what they do is they begin to group that together instead of realizing, okay, you have individuals that want to bring a negative outlook on the movement, whether it's the organization, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement or the protests or whatever. And so we've got to get to a place where we're educating people. And so how do we do that and make it effective?
Ooh, can I jump in?
Yep.
Awesome. Hey, first and foremost, there ain't nothing that I could ever do or say to put myself in your shoes and what you've been through, right? So as a white guy, you got to realize that up front. But where you make the stance at and where you change that direction at is you learn and you talk to folks and you figure out what they've been through and what they've gone through, right? You know, Carl Gaines, my best friend growing up. And I'll never forget the story he told me. Him and my mom was walking in the neighborhood and Carl saw her and they were talking and a car pulled up and said, Mrs. Evans, are you okay? And she's like, yeah. And, because Carl wasn't white, right? And this is in my neighborhood. So my mom's like, this is my second son, Carl. I mean, we look alike. What's the problem? Like kick rocks, kid, right? And so as white folks, you really gotta take it to that next level and learn about what's happened, right? And so you guys mentioned a couple of different things about the way that you have to talk to your young sons and daughters about driving versus the way we do, right? Or you look at the fact that if you go into a store and your wife can't open up her purse, right? Or the fact you can't walk down the street without having a kid in one hand and a dog in the other, or vice versa. That's a problem. That's a huge problem, right? And so the stuff that we're still fighting for today is the stuff that folks been fighting for the last 400 years. And so that's as a white community, we kind of got to step up and say, look, this ain't right. It ain't been right. Never is right. And if you get uncomfortable doing it, so what? You get uncomfortable doing it. But everybody I met on here, Mr. Webb and Mr. Etheridge and Mr. McMichael, you guys are my friends. So if and I know if you're straight with Jay, you're straight with me. So it like when I step up and I say something to somebody, and I'll tell you a quick story too, because I lost a friend 2 weeks ago. One of my ride or dies I was in his wedding, he was in my wedding. A great friend of mine, and I left the door open for him to come back, but he thought because I spoke out about social injustice, I was speaking about the BLM movement, where it was about the the looting and the rioting and all that. And I wasn't speaking about that. I was speaking about social injustice, right? Which I call the trichotomy of race, law, and environment. And it's detrimental, and it's been that way. And it kind of goes back to what you guys were saying a little while ago. You know, when you talk about injustice against an African American or a black person, the first thing somebody else does was, well, what about black on black crime, or what about this guy getting shot? They always try to change the subject, right?
Yeah.
And so you got as white folks got to wake up and realize what's going on and why that's going on, and combat it right at the head, right? And say that's not what we're talking about. And I've had numerous conversations with folks that have, well, what about this? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the BLM movement. We're talking about 400 years of oppression. We're talking about making things right and getting things back on track the way they should be, and giving people a voice. They should automatically have a voice, but for some reason society deemed it unacceptable. So that's kind of my stance, guys, and how I'm trying to make the world a little bit better place through educating folks.
Hey, I appreciate that. I definitely appreciate that.
I have a question for David, because in Race and Reconciliation, what do you feel? And I like the story of your mom. What is it like behind the scenes when you're advocating, when you're just with your white counterparts?
Yeah,
that's a great question, and I'll be glad to answer that. Half the time, they just don't want to hear it, or they put it off on somebody else, or it's somebody else's fault. It's always somebody else's fault, right? Because nothing's ever anybody's fault. Or they'll bring up a statistic that is totally irrelevant to the conversation. And that's when you got to just put them back on track. There's a buddy of mine that posted about Mr. Floyd and, the aftermath of what happened and what they found in his system. And I was like, that's irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. I don't care about any of that. And you shouldn't either. You should care about the fact that the police's job is to protect and serve. And he was not protected and he was not served. And that's what you should care about. The other crap that the media says, because they're going to spin it however they want to spin it, right? Because that's what the media does. That's just, and sorry for saying crap, Jay. My bad. I said it twice. Didn't mean to. But that's what the media does. And that's how they kind of, let's take the pressure off this and put it back over here. And through everything, I'd keep posting about, look, we got to unite as one. We got to come together as a country. And it can't be two sides against the middle. It's got to be one side marching forward, and that's the only way change is going to happen. And but it just wears on my heart the fact that we're still fighting battles we've been fighting for 400 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's these are the type of conversations that David and I have. And even I don't know if you remember the situation where you actually experienced the racism taking place right then and there. I think it was one of your friends.
Man, there's been a bunch of them. I'm trying to remember which one it was, but there's been a bunch.
I think I don't know if it was a cop or if it was a store owner had asked you a question, but ignored your black friend or something like that. And then you approached them about it.
Oh, what was it? It was I know what you're talking about. I'm trying to remember the exact details, but what it boiled down to is that we were in a store and he did just like Jermaine said. The cop had approached us and he said something to my friend, and I was like, well, what about me? No, you're good. You got nothing to say. Well, wait, but I'm here, right? And I'm a business owner, and I'm a man of God too. So what about me? Nope, nothing. And they got kind of crazy. I got a different story too. After some of the riots broke out recently, I've got, Jermaine knows, tell you, I'm big in hunting and fishing, so I got dogs, and I take dogs to run all the time. And we passed this little store, and we stopped in to get some water for my dog and drinks for me and my son. And it's one of those country stores, you know what I mean? It's one of those out in the middle of nowhere stores. And this lady back behind the counter, and this is going to sound bad because it's going to sound like I was expecting something different, which I totally was. But I was expecting her to go the opposite end of the spectrum, right?
You've told me that.
You know what I'm saying? That everything's black and white, and black folks did this and white folks did this. And literally, we're cashing out, and she looks at my son, who's 11, and goes, "I'm sorry you have to grow up in this time and during this time." And I was like, "What'd you say?" Because I'm trying to get out of there, right? Because I know something's going to come out. But she says that, and my 11-year-old looks at her and goes, "That's okay. my dad's going to fix it. My dad and his friends are going to fix it. And I was like, all right, challenge accepted. Let's roll. And so, you know, the kids can say the best things and kind of ground you all the time, you know. But I was so glad that he spoke up and said that. But man, there's countless times. My boy that was the agent, he still love him to death, but he didn't realize that what I was speaking about was social injustice. It wasn't about, you know, the aftermath of what comes with it, the negative context to the movement, and so man, he pretty much just cut me out and defriended. See you later. Maybe we'll talk one day. And I'm like, hey man, if that's what I've got to do, if that's the sacrifice I got to make to change a you know, point of view or an opinion, then that's what I'm gonna do. Because I'm not leaving this place worse than I left, than I found it. No way.
Yeah, and I think that's so vitally key that, you know, our white brothers and sisters join in on the fight, because let's be real, we can't make change. Change can't come without them, and that's one thing that I've been, you know, especially when you're talking about the systems and things that have been in place. If we use, you know, Pastor Lavelle's definition of racism, then we don't have the capacity as African Americans to make that change. You see what I'm saying? Because of the finances, the, you know, everything, ownership. I mean, we were talking earlier, a couple of other friends, about the 40 acres and a mule, you know, and how we never got that. So we've always been behind the 8 ball and now trying to move forward in that. And so it's definitely imperative that we have those that are reaching across the aisle, so to speak, to come together and say, okay, look, this is wrong. And that's what I've been really encouraged by in this season, you know, as it relates with the George Floyd incident and things, is we've really seen people that would have never spoken up 4 years ago, people that didn't speak up during the Colin Kaepernick thing. It took for somebody to really see an individual's life being taken and being dehumanized, you know, by having a knee on the back of their neck. This man's crying out for his mother, saying he can't breathe. For people that really had a heart to say, you know what, enough is enough. And we've gotten to that place. You know, one of the things that, you know, one of the questions I had, you know, we were talking about defining racism and all that. It's like, okay, so at what point do we move forward? What are the things, what are the systems and things do you guys feel like we need to, or what I should say this, what is the first step? What is the first approach that you guys think we should take to combat the system? Now, one thing about racism is going to be here the rest of our lives, right? Because I always say racism is a matter of the heart. You know, we have the systems that we can change, but we can't change anybody's heart. Only God can deal with their heart. And so, you know, those that are racist and they have the hatred in their hearts, we can't change that. However, we can get these jokers out of these offices. Come on, we can get these bad apples out of the good bunch, especially as it relates to the systematic oppression. I was sharing with my daughters, I said, it's even to the point with the judicial system. I said, you have judges that are on the take because of the privatization of prisons. And so they're on the take and they're getting fed money based on them sending African Americans to jail. It's unfortunate. had it in my statistics in one of our messages. It's unfortunate that you have a white man that's 20 years old and a black man that's 20 years old and the same offense, same crime. And the white man gets 9 months and then the rest of his probation. And the black man gets 10 to 15 years for the same offense. Okay. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. And so in you guys' outlook, what would you say is the first thing that we need to tackle as an African-American race, but then in general, dealing with racism in America?
Hey, Jay, real quick. I didn't answer Reverend McMichael's question all the way, and I apologize. You asked what happens in the backgrounds when you have those conversations. And let me dive down just one more quick second in that, and then we'll go to this next question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Different age groups respond differently. And so what's crazy is, like, my dad, who's 82, he'll be 82 Christmas, grew up in the middle of segregation, right? So he thought one way, but in his later years, it's totally transformed. He thinks a totally different way. And you got people that are my age that will listen to reason, that will debate with you, but you still have those folks that just cut you off completely. Don't want to hear it. Doesn't affect me. I'm afraid of the way I look, how I'm going to look to the society, but you still have a good group of folks that will listen to you as well. And then you got the younger kids who I hate this term, but I don't think they see color at all. I think, and I hate it because I don't ever want people to see color in a general. I want everybody to be equal across the board. Right. So that's why I say it that way. But I think, like, for my sons, I mean, they have just as many African-American friends as they do Mexican friends, as they do Italian friends, and whatever. I mean, that's just the way we roll. And so I think there is a system there, or not a system, but a group of folks that can really make that change if they want to. Like the folks that I've had numerous conversations with, they may start on the right-hand side of the spectrum, but they're going to end up on the left-hand side if they listen and they're open. So I wanted to take that one step forward, man. I'm sorry I didn't answer that correctly the first time, or the whole entirety in its first time.
Are you good? And one thing I want to say, even to kind of, you made a statement that I used to say a lot in my younger years, that I didn't see color, right? And a lot of people say that I don't see color, but think about it this way, and I like to challenge people's thinkings that say that. Because when you don't see color, then you assume that you see me just like you. And so now you're not seeing me for my experiences. You see what I'm saying? You don't get to appreciate the experiences that I have as a black man, and so you should see that color and say, okay, yeah, this is a black man. Now let me understand what his experiences are. And that's just in general, not just, of course, I know you do it all the time with me. But a lot of times I hear people say that, and it's like, okay, wait, when you say that, you're kind of negating the fact that my color has brought me certain experiences that I've experienced that you haven't experienced. You know what I'm saying? You're ultimately saying, okay, well, you're just like me. But no, that's not the case. Many times what keeps us from moving forward is that we don't sit down and have conversations like this, right? We don't sit down and have open, real dialogue and transparent dialogue and really listen. I think that's the problem, is we don't listen. We come to the conversation with preconceived notions. We come to the conversation with perceptions of individuals instead of listening to what they're experiencing. And I think now, outside of listening, people were able to see. These things have been happening forever, since I've been born. I'm 44 years old. They've been happening since I was born, right? But we were never able to see them. All these years, all these times, African Americans have been saying they've been getting these things done to them, by whether it's by the cops, whether it's going for property rental, whatever the case may be, going into a bank and getting a loan, or whatever the case may be. One of the things one of the statistics I brought out was that African Americans have to literally send out, I think it was 25% more applications to jobs because of their names being more ethnic. And I'm like, that's crazy. You know what I mean? That they got to do that. And some people even use an alias in order to get the job that they want to get, which brings me, I'm gonna talk about that a little bit later. But so I just wanted to bring that point out, is that, we have to get to a point where we say, okay, no matter how uncomfortable the conversation is, we have to have the conversation. I mean, like this. I mean, I can imagine that David, well, I don't know about David, but the average, white man sitting on a panel with 4 black men would probably be very, very uncomfortable. You know what I mean? And but you get past that uncomfortability in order to move forward. You know what I mean? It's like a man in a marriage and he's not a natural communicator. Well, if you want that marriage to succeed, you learn how to communicate or what have you. And so, but back to the other question, well, what's the next step? We always have these conversations. We always, well, at least in my circle, we do. And one of the things that I've been on in 2020 is action. What is the things that we need to do as a community, but even as whole, as humanity, to move forward and change a lot of the atrocities that we see happening every day against black and brown people here in America?
I'll start. I'll mention 2 points, one in the home and one in my community. With my children, I am deliberately sitting down with them and having conversations with them about race. Raising African American children, I am responsible. I take it as a sole badge of honor to teach my children about how to love people, how to stand up for themselves, and how to speak from a place of education, love, and just really having a real perspective. And as a home, we talk about what it means to have Black privilege, not just white privilege, but Black privilege, because we don't want our kids to think that they're better than their friends, just because they may live in a better neighborhood or so on and so forth. We talk about the grace of God. And so we make sure that our kids, we're having those conversations constantly, both in a joking manner, sometimes in a serious manner. I mean, we sit down and we study figures in history that you don't see and hear about on TV, so that they get a real perspective of what it means to fight for change. Secondly, I'll mention something that I've taken upon myself to do is to connect with people in my neighborhood. Not just to drive by and say hello, but to stop and just have a general conversation, get to know people. The other day, actually a couple of weeks ago now, we had a nice little water balloon fight in the neighborhood. I mean, you should have saw folks coming together in a little park right in the neighborhood to just have some fun. And what that translates into is an old school principle of the neighborhood actually knew each other. I mean, that's an old school concept that we talk about it when we were kids, that these are things that we did and that everybody knew everybody. Well, we can bring that back. Just stop and get to know people, both Black and white. So those are two things that I would mention that I'm doing, in addition to some of the other things platform wise, just in my neighborhood and in my home, to be a positive influence of change.
Okay. Who's next? Pastor
Roswell,
Michael?
you want to go? Okay. So I don't know if you're asking me what's my next step or what's the nation's next step, but I'll just take it personal and say that I use the prophetic pulpit as my platform to educate and empower those whom I have influence over. So that's not just my congregation, that's the community. That's my family, my nuclear family, my wife, my children, my siblings, nieces and nephews, and really driving home the importance of our fight and struggle in a way that is not claiming the victim role, but the victor role, not claiming the worrier role, but the warrior role, not claiming the pitiful role, but the powerful role, and showing that we are fearfully, wonderfully made, since this church is a part of this conversation, and that we have to know who we are, know whose we are, and be able to present that to the world in a way that, not in a way that, but with confidence and charisma, so that those who don't know will know when they have come in contact with us. So it's really important that we use our platform, the prophetic pulpit. It's important that as we look at what the prophets did in terms of fighting for economic and social justice, when kings and rulers took over, and then the least and the left out were disenfranchised.
Right.
You see Amos come out of nowhere in King Jeroboam's reign and say, "Listen, we need justice to roll down like water, and righteousness like a mighty stream." So it's important for us to use that platform. So I would say for me, my next step, and one of the steps that I've taken, is making sure that I get information out, that I'm giving people opportunities to be active and involved, and not just in the sense of making noise, but making strides towards difference and change, systemic change.
All right, Roosevelt.
For me, I am challenging myself to do more. So I'm on a couple boards, and I'm active in the community, but I'm trying to be more specific in terms of more. I have a concern about young men in my city, and in Wilson, we have our first African American mayor ever that was elected. Okay, and we have a majority Black council here. And when the George Floyd incident happened, honestly, we haven't had that issue here in Wilson, but our young Black men still tore up our city. We made the news. And to go beyond George Floyd, we have a serious problem with dropouts, and most of the dropouts with young men stopping school early, and dealing with education, but not just dealing with the men, but dealing with educators as well, and trying to bridge the gap between the worlds. And my concern is really with young men, not young men that have their head on straight, but those that are lost in life, and definitely here in Wilson. And I'm going to tell you, it's a challenge to reach some of them because they don't want to hear anyone. And so that's my challenge to myself on how do I move forward. I'm looking at what do I do within local government. So I'm like Maurice, I'm just focusing on community, because I do a lot of things globally and things like that. But I have nephews, but they all are many of them are still getting lost in the climate of Eastern North Carolina. And that concerns me. And whether the parent is in church or non-church, there's something that is happening systemically with young men. They just drift away from good morals and values into this other la la land. And I want to be a voice in that. And so I'm spending time trying to use the leverage I have on boards and those that I oversee to find out where their leverages are, to see what we can do to move forward. Because I believe that we do lack leadership, not leadership upward, but leadership downward, where we have more people that are doing grassroots. So I've met some brothers that are doing grassroots things, but they either are too militant or they don't have the poise to enter into doors that where their voices need to be heard. And that is a part of racism that I find that is really problematic, that you can have good potential, great voice, but if you haven't reached that polished place to enter the door, you'll just be blocked out. So I want to be a voice that can create a bridge for that.
Okay. And then David.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. So a couple of different things. One is continue the mission of making everybody aware of what's going on, right? And talking to folks. And one of the things I did a while back was I challenged folks to watch that movie Just Mercy, and then come back and tell me what you think is the worst thing that happened on that movie, right? And some people did, and some people are like, "Oh, you're crazy." I'm like, "Why not? Why?" Well, I mean, you're in COVID, you're locked down. What else you gonna do? Come on now, work with me here, right? And it was funny because you got different reactions, right? And it was the fact that he was incarcerated unjustly, and he was incarcerated without proof, and that's exactly right. But the one thing that I was hoping somebody would pick up was, and they didn't, was at the end when they rolled through the credits, it said that sheriff got reelected for 8 more terms. The sheriff that
Yeah.
incarcerated that man falsely repeated for 8 more terms. Like that, to me, that's, I mean, God bless Willie and what he went through, but the fact that we're still electing officials that continue to do that is just
Right.
asinine, right? And so on that side of there's things I do like that all the time. But there's Maurice, I was going to ask you, are you in Durham by chance?
I'm in Cary.
Okay. There's a gentleman, Coach Keenan, that reaches out into some and does water balloon fights and does get-togethers and so I donate to his cause quite a bit.
Okay.
And he comes by my house and I'll pick up because he likes to do toiletries and take things into the to the inner city to help, and so we'll do that. And heck, even today, man, just buying a police officer a meal, just something to better the community and better yourself. But my most important goal is raising my kids right. That's for me. That's my legacy, right? I mean, forget all the other stuff in the houses and cars and whatever. If my kids don't turn out right, then I failed. And so that's the biggest thing for me. The other thing would be just to make sure that people know that it's you're gonna have to wade through some tough waters to make this work, and and you need to be prepared to do it. And if you're not, then you can't half step. You got to go all the way in. So that's kind of the route that I'm running right now, man.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I'm glad you guys took it from that approach, because I do believe that like the Word of God says, charity starts at home, and so we've got to take care of our local community. That's one thing I've been pushing, and my thing would be get out and vote, and it's going right along the lines of what David was saying about these same people being elected over and over and over again. I'm a firm believer that we need to have term limits even on Congress and senators, because they become career, politicians. And so you have these same mentalities that are still present in our Congress and our Senate. And they're not going to look to change any rules because they don't feel like anything is broken. They don't feel like the system is broken. And
to that point, I believe I would say when it comes to elected officials that there needs to be a certain number of slots for African Americans or Latinos.
I agree.
Because I believe, and then I say, then let those individuals, it should not be a thing of we have to beat out a Caucasian, right? If there's 2 seats, that means one of them goes to somebody from another community. I think that there are a lot of ways that our judicial system could go in the right direction in terms of equal representation and making sure that the voices of the community is heard, whether that's Native American, there's so many different ethnicities that exist and subgroups within groups that we could really do some things. And I don't think I don't think we should have to fight for those amongst parties. I think that they should be designated. Absolutely.
And that's key. That's one of the things that I've been bringing out, even in the conversation we had today, was that I think that's one of the biggest injustices as it relates to social injustice and really changing the system. And then, of course, the whole money behind everything, even the privatization of prisons and the millions and billions of dollars that the government is making off the backs of these prisoners. And it doesn't make sense for an individual to get 25 years for their first marijuana charge. I mean, how can you make sense of that? You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like understanding certain things like that. And then if it does not apply equally, one of the things I brought out is like, okay, why we cannot have an equilateral approach to even terms? Don't say, okay, don't give the discretion to the judge to say between this and that. No, just say, okay, across the board, across the United States, if it's the first marijuana charge, then this is what the sentence is. And it'd be across the board. I know it may be a little bit more difficult to implement, but something of that nature would begin to move forward and, to really, like you said, equaling that playing field and say, okay, this is what it is. There's not going to be any favoritism. And then you prevent those things. You prevent a judge from saying, okay, if has a little, a racial bias, and prejudice in his heart, you prevent him from being able to say, okay, I can use my power to enslave an additional the new Jim Crow. If you haven't read that book, check it out, The New Jim Crow, and understanding how that operates, even in our judicial system or what have you.
Well,
Pastor Mike, you was going to say something else?
I was just going to say prison reform is a must.
It's a must.
In fact, I just sat in a commutation hearing for a young man that I've known for more than 34 years, who's done 34 years, and his sentence was just commuted. And I found that process very interesting and really applauded the lieutenant governor and attorney general and that board for that work. And then for the local officials that I know from council who wrote letters, because we can talk prison reform. I think this goes back to Roosevelt's point that we can do this type of talking, but the work has to happen behind the scenes, right? So if I know somebody that's in a position that has the ability to speak on behalf of someone, right, that prison reform comes through the support of those elected officials and those who have the influence to be able to say, hey, this individual deserves a second chance to be re-infiltrated back into the community. I mean, 34 years is a long time to be infiltrated. And I believe if we look back to 1955, when I was talking about Emmett Till, right, and how he was lied on, and then it comes out years later that it wasn't the case. That's the type of system we're living in, where we have to make sure that those who are judges, those who are attorneys, those who are victims advocates, all of those individuals are trained on social competence, cultural competence, equality, and equity. So people will give you equality. They'll say, oh, you can buy a house wherever you want, but they'll just raise the taxes. So it's not just important to have equality. We need equity. So, you can tell me I can go to school anywhere, but if I can't afford to go, then it's not equitable. So as Americans, we have to really start to demand justice at a higher level, so that it's not this surface response to, oh, let's just let them do this. But no, we want to be considered equal and have access to everything that those our white counterparts, period.
Right. And I was just reading this week, matter of fact, was it Sunday night, about the case, the guys here in North Carolina. They were in prison, I think it was 45 years for a crime. They got picked up. I think they were 11, 13, and 15 or something like that. And they got picked up because the little girl kissed them on the cheek. And the cops came and picked them up and, charged them with raping the girl or what have you. And so they was in prison for 45 years, just got released and everything. But these are the kind of things that happen, to African Americans. And like you said, because of the crookedness of the judicial system, we have to deal with this. And again, go ahead.
Last point about this judicial system. I don't feel like we need to pass laws to correct laws. I just say correct the law. If it's racist,
absolutely.
You know what I mean? It's like, I've got to go through the Senate and the Congress and the this and the that. It's like, look, if it's not equal and equitable, then we need to, I think we're at a place as a nation and as educated and intellectual as we are to say, why do we have to pass a voting bill? Right. Everybody should vote.
Period.
It should be automatic, just like the secret, just like the services. When you get into, when you turn 18, listen, we was automatically enrolled, right? So we have to start to demand justice from a standpoint where we say, listen, if it's wrong, then you don't need to get permission to fix it. It just needs to be fixed. I don't know how we get there. I mean, I'm not a politician.
But you know what? And that's what
to me. And I'm just a young man from Philadelphia, born and raised. And
and see, that's the thing we have to get to. One of the things that I was talking to my daughters about was like, listen, don't just vote to be voting Trump out. You know what I'm saying? Understand what the issues are, even still, right? Understand what the issues are, especially on the local level. Understand what these politicians stand for. What is their track record? What are the things that they voted for in the past? Because that stuff really matters. If a lot of this stuff that we deal with, and that we're affected by, the president, majority of the time, is not going to even be affected by that, right? He's not the one who really implements a lot of that. It's really our local politicians that deal with a lot of stuff, like local taxes and all that type of stuff that we have to deal with. But because we don't understand how the system works, we don't understand how Congress and politics work, we've got to understand those things. Don't just be voting to be voting. You know what I'm saying? We thank God for the right to that, but be an educated voter and understand who stands for what, and vote what you need to vote. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely key. And that's the question. Is like, okay, and that's kind of where I was going with the question initially. But even though I like you guys brought it to your personal homes or what have you, is where do we go from here? I mean, how do we get to the in-depth procedures to make these things happen? I guess it starts with politicians, and maybe that's something we don't have the answer to. Like Pastor Mike said, he just a city boy from Philly. I'm just a country boy from Raleigh. You know what I'm saying? So, I may not know everything, but that's why I feel like we have to bind together and come together, because one thing is for sure, I may not have the answer. Roosevelt may not have the answer. Maurice may not have the answer. Lavelle may not have the answer. David may not have the answer. But guess what? Somebody has the answer. And so we got to come together and say, okay, what are the answers? How do we put the discussions and things into motion? I'm going to reach out to even some of our local politicians here and see if I can get them on the panel. And I want to bring you guys back as well and see, and put them to the fire and say, okay, what do we need to do? We realize in America as a whole has come to a breaking point. And we see, even in Portland, it's been over 101 days now of rioting and protesting and things. It's like people are tired. We're at a point where we're tired and we need to see change. We need to see change. And the way that we make that happen is we have, like you said, don't create new laws, change the ones you got. I mean, that's the simplest thing, is change the ones you have. That doesn't make any sense to create a new law to debunk the law that you got already. How much sense does that make? But we're, that's great. You brought that point out.
You have to acknowledge that it's wrong.
And that's the truth.
So the problem with America is their lack of willingness to take ownership for where we are. So, if you're going to allow the laws of the past to govern our present, that means you've accepted the wrong of the past.
Right.
So now that you've accepted it, you have to now, if you want to shift it, you have to acknowledge that it was wrong and then make it right. That's where reconciliation comes in.
I was just curious to say.
Reconciliation says, here is your slots in Congress. Here is your slots in Senate. Here's your reparations. Here is your leadership role in our nation, because we built it, right? You have some ownership in this nation because you were the economic source,
right?
So I think that it's hard for white people, and I can't say names, but I said to somebody in a very important meeting, I said, in order for you to really make a change, you're going to have to celebrate Black men. And it's hard for white men to do that. You're going to have to acknowledge that Black men are great and are great fathers and are great economic, they are part of the economy. You have to really see that fatherhood matters in Black communities and not just look at all of the gangbangers on the street. You have to say, oh, these guys are working hard. So if that doesn't happen, then there is no reconciliation. Right. Because and I hate to say it like that, but white people are just unwilling to take ownership. So instead, they'll just find a way to, like David said, create another statistic. I watch all of the propaganda that's on television, and I'm like, why are we talking about this? I thought we were talking about this. And I'm just looking at how each side makes I watch all of the channels. Each side,
all of them.
And I'm just like, this is just good entertainment. And anytime you can just say whatever you want to say, and a lot of it is because of fear. So phobias come because of fear, right? And the only way phobias are combated is with education. And if we don't educate and empower, then we're missing the mark. So anyway, let me get off my soapbox. It's almost 9:30.
Nah, you good, Doc. You good. We was wrapping it up. But you know, and that's what oh man, I just had a thought that I was gonna say, and I just lost it. But yeah, David, you was ready to say something?
Yeah, I agree with what Reverend Michael was talking about and what he's saying, and you know, it is uncomfortable for white folks to admit, because look, man, you're living what you've been taught in school, what you've been taught for decades, what your parents have been taught, what your grandparents have been taught, what their grandparents have been taught. I mean, it's you're changing that dynamic, right? So if you can figure out a way to change it and doing, and I think it's a bunch of little things that's going to make the ball completely roll, right? So I don't have all the answers, but I know what I'm going to do is going to be right in my eyes and right to help, you know, progress us down the line. Then you hit the nail on the head. I mean, until white America wakes up and says, hey, look, we got a problem, until they realize that's a problem, they're not going to do anything to change it, right? You asked a little minute ago, like, what are some other things you're doing to change? So I'll tell you personally, my diversity program in my company has gone through the roof. I've got some fellows I'm mentoring. They help me just as much as I help them, right? And then getting them into the business, into construction, and learning the trade, and being able to, you know, make more money for their families, and be better men, and have a trade they can fall back on when everything else closes down, right? But I just think that the education piece is so huge, because everybody's got. I'm gonna use a quote here, and you guys are probably gonna laugh at me, but it's, you know, Mike Tyson is one of the best boxers ever, and he goes, everybody's got a lot of. I'm trying to do it justice, and I may mess this up, but the essential is everybody's real great until they get punched in the mouth, right?
Yeah.
They get punched right in the mouth. That's right. They get punched right in the mouth. That's it. That's my man. You know, so it's like everybody's got these little phones, right? And everybody's all brave. They got the little Microsoft muscles, and they're going to post whatever they want to post. But when it comes time to make that change, or when it comes time to meet your maker, right? That's when it all matters. That's when it all, not all matters, but that's like what you've done up to that point is what's going to be your destiny, right? And so for me, man, it's going to be continue to educate, continue to support, continue to fund, continue to speak up, speak out, give hand ups, not handouts, and continue to learn on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
I had to go back and look at that story that I told you about the racism, Jay, and I was going to tell you guys the story. So my IT manager is one of my really good friends. His name is Bernard, and man, he's just jacked. Like he works out all the time. He used to be Tito Ortiz's personal security detail when he lived out in Orange County, California. And we went to lunch one day, and the guy literally turned his back to Bernard and asked me for my order. And Bernard was first in line. I was like, you need to take his order first. And he wouldn't do it. So I was like, you know what, B, let's go somewhere else. And that kind of stuff still affects me to this day, that's still going on, right? So if you teach people and you got to have some grace, right? So my wife always talks about grace all the time, because man, it's like back on the football field someday, Jay. You got to beat that man across from you. You know, if they disagree with you, you got to just go at them. And so I've got to learn grace from my wife all the time, and stay humble and stay meek, and versus just flying off the handle at them. And so that's my vow to move forward. Maurice, I didn't mean to cut you off. You're gonna say something, man.
I was just going to, my final thought is Romans 8:1, man. There's no condemnation to them that are in Christ Jesus. And, you know, we're not slaves anymore. We're free. The Spirit of the Lord has made us free. And as long as we continue to spread the gospel and let people know that they are free, they don't have to be bound by racist ideologies, both black, white, or whatever. You can live a free life, and that freedom to me is also in choosing to be brave, choosing to love my brother, my sister, and not judge them based on the color of their skin. but to get to know people and to love them from a deeper place. And that's how I reconcile with the world that we live in. Is racism alive and well? Yes, it is. But the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ is greater than anything we can experience in this world, and that's what I stand by.
I like it. Like everything about it.
Amen. Man, you guys, it's been about an hour and a half, and we still got a lot we could get into and dig into, man. We're gonna have to bring all of you guys back. It's been an amazing discussion. Oh, that's right. Okay, you ain't had your final word. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No final word. I had a lot of words, but I had no final word. I would just say,
go ahead.
Let it run down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. That we need to continue in this fight, and it's the church's job to be at the forefront of that, and we can't be afraid. We have to be prophetic and stand in permanent opposition to the status quo.
All right, Roosevelt.
My final words are, if we can get more clergy that will be brave and bold to stand out and have conversation and commitment, not just conversation, but some commitment, that we could be on the front end of creating change within our communities and families.
Awesome. Absolutely. I think that is so key. That's one of the things that I have really a mandate within myself to really reach across and bring clergy together. And it's unfortunate that, our own personal agendas, we've seen it in the church for years, where our own personal agendas and we're concerned about the butts in the seat as it relates to the financial piece of it, instead of dealing with the social issues and speaking out for things that may be uncomfortable. There may be things that will cause you to lose members. I know I've lost friends this year because I've spoke out about these things, and so you have to be willing to do that. You have to be willing to get to a point of that. One of the messages that I preached this past Sunday was talking about, in the Colossians, the 3rd chapter, 13th verse. It says, "Forbearing one another and forgiving one another." And then he commissioned us and commanded us to love one another after that, and so we have to get to a place that forbearing means that you understand the differences that one has. You understand their experiences. And if you are at fault of that, those offenses or what have you, then you forgive your brother, but also your brother should ask for forgiveness. And I believe that this conversation in racism has to be at that point. It's where, especially within the church, we have to be an example. We have to lead out and say, okay, this is not right. We know it's not right. And like Pastor Michael was saying earlier, the church has been complicit because they've been silent. They've been silent on both sides of the equation. From Caucasian pastors to especially white pastors. I mean, you have, it's unfortunate that you have a lot of even multicultural and mixed congregations that have, a lot of African Americans in them, but you don't see their pastors speaking out against their injustices. To me, that's a huge indictment. And so it's like, okay, you'll take my tithes and offering, but you won't speak up for when people are doing me wrong. And that's an issue. I don't believe that that's in totality of what God would desire for us, what have you. And so I'm so grateful. I thank you guys so much for coming on tonight and giving us some great dialogue. And again, I'm going to bring you guys back on, what have you, to really continue this conversation. And really, I'm about action and about moving forward. And that's why I was so glad to meet Pastor Lavelle, that then met Roosevelt, and of course all the others. All of these gentlemen on here are about action. They're active in their communities. They're doing the things necessary to make a change, to make a difference. And so I'm going to go around quickly and tell me what you guys have coming up, any promo type stuff, or if you want to give out your handles and how people can reach you on your social media networks, you do that. And then I'm being led to ask Pastor McMichael to lead us out in prayer tonight at the end of that, once everybody finishes promoting everything they're doing. or what have you. So let's start with you, Apostle Roosevelt.
All right. You can reach me on Facebook, Roosevelt Etheridge, the Global Leader, or you can find me on YouTube. And God will be praised with that. Blessings.
All right, Maurice.
Thank you so much, Pastor Jay, for having me on. I certainly
Absolutely.
appreciate the invitation, and it's been a blessing to be a part of the dialogue. I can be reached on my brand new podcast entitled Power Moves, where we talk about faith, family, God, and local events, national events, etc. It's called Power Moves. You can find it on Spotify or all of the outlets for that. And then on Facebook, we are 21st Century Fatherhood. If you just type in 21st Century Fatherhood, you'll find our page. But those are the two ways that you can find me. Also, our website, which is 21fatherhood.com. You can find me there as well. So look forward to continuing the conversation and getting back to work.
Absolutely. David?
So, Pastor Jay, I just want to thank you and tell you that I love you, man. I appreciate you bringing me on. Fellas, it was so nice talking to you and meeting you. And I hope we can do it again real soon. I appreciate everything that you're standing for and everything that you're doing. And know that that change is going to come. It's going to happen. We just got to keep pushing, and we're going to push it the right way. I'm just a typical guy that's just trying to make a difference. I don't have any books or any churches, but I wouldn't hesitate being in any of y'all's churches on a Sunday morning. I can tell you that. So God bless you all, and keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. And Pastor Big Michael.
Nice meeting all of the gentlemen, and thank you, Pastor Freeman, for allowing me the opportunity to be a part of the discussion. I can be found on social media, Lavelle McMichael, Facebook, YouTube, and then Instagram, Twitter, and all of that other stuff is at The Real Lavelle. So check me out. And of course, Transforming the Minds of Men, Maximizing Potential from Childhood to Manhood. I'm on Amazon, Kindle. And the book pretty much talks about the fatherlessness of Black boys and how that's impacting the home, community, and society as a whole. And some strategies of dealing with that individually as a social worker, teacher, as a Black man, as somebody who works with Black men, so check it out and let me know. And then let's pray. Lord, we just thank you for the opportunity to come together to discuss the color of love. We know that color is your spirit, and we thank you for allowing us as men, white and Black, to come together tonight to discuss race in America. And God, we know that it exists, and we ask that you would give our nation the ability to reconcile these wrongs and to see each individual as a human and to provide them with equity and equality. God, I ask that you would bind us together as one, strengthen this brotherhood. And God, I ask that you would just open up doors that no man can open and close doors that no man can shut. In the name of Jesus. And we just give your name praise, glory, and honor as we leave from this setting, but never from your presence. Go with the supply of blood over us and bring us back at the appointed time. We will give your name praise, glory, and honor now unto him that is able to keep us from falling. Present us faultless before his presence with exceeding joy. To the only wise God, our Savior, glory, majesty, dominion, and power. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you guys so much for attending tonight. We will see you on the next one. You guys have a blessed day.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.